Hey neighbors, Kevin here with etrailer, and today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Roadmaster rear anti-sway bar here in our 2005 Coachmen Mirada Class A motorhome. If you own a motorhome, you know that sway is standard with it. There are a few ways that you can help mitigate that sway that you get while you're traveling from point A to point B. Now typically that sway is going to be caused because we are pretty top heavy. We have a lot of heavy equipment up on the top of this. It's a big box. We have a ton of air pushing against us, whether it's just the natural wind going through here or crosswinds from another vehicle on the road with us. So what happens is essentially your two frame rails are going to start to twist and turn back and forth as that weight teeters and totters back and forth on them. So the anti-sway bar is going to be another cross member that's going to bridge the gap between those two frame rails to help strengthen them up, and it's going to come with some end links that's going to allow it to adjust so that when you are having your suspension compress and decompress, it's going to be able to ride along with it and not bind up. So for the specific chassis, it's going to have a few different options when it comes to the rear sway bar. To figure out exactly what you're going to need, you're going to want to first have the year, make, model. So that is going to be the year of the chassis, which is always going to be 1 year older than what the actual motorhome is itself. So with this being a 2005, our chassis is actually a 2004. So from there, the next thing we're going to need to know is what our GVWR is so that we can make sure that we're picking out the correct kit to go along with our chassis. And with that, there are some other options depending on what your factory sway bar is. So with ours, it sits on top of the differential, right on the front of it. And with other ones, there's some where it's going to be sitting in the back, some where it's sitting a little bit lower. There's even special notes in our kit for how you need to mount up the end links to those plates that are going to bolt up with your spring stack. And depending on GVWR, where that's factory sway bar sitting, that's going to be that differentiator there. So it's really important that you get down there, do a once over and look at it. You honestly already should be looking at it every once in a while, just making sure that your factory equipment is still up to snuff. With ours today, the bushings were missing. So essentially that bar is really just pressing on the end links. It's not actually pressing against the axle with those two D-shaped mounts holding it to it, just because there's really no pressure pushing against it now. So maintenance is going to be a big thing here, but you honestly probably aren't going to have to do too much maintenance with this. I mean, you're really just getting down there, double checking the bushings, making sure that each of your bolts are still torqued to the correct torque setting, and that's it. So maybe doing it once a season. If you're an avid tower or hauler with your motorhome, maybe that's a point where you're going to need to do it a little bit more often and just double check to make sure that you're getting the best out of your product. So with all that being said, if you don't feel like you can do this at home, this is something where, you know, I kind of ran into some issues just because this is a much older chassis and it's been sitting outside. The U-bolts really got corroded up, but that might not be the case for your motorhome. It might be in a better environment where it's really not getting corroded and you don't really have a hard time taking off the nuts that are on the actual U-bolts. So this could be a super easy thing for you, but if it's not, or you're just a little bit too intimidated by it, then feel free to use our dealer locator. You can enter in your zip code and find a shop to get it professionally installed. Now, if you are wanting to do this yourself, stick around and I'll walk you through our process. To start off our installation, we are going to have to first support our motorhome. So if you're doing this on the ground, totally fine. But if you are going to be under it like I am with jacks, you need to make sure that you are pushing up on the suspension. We don't want to be lifting by the frame. We want the full weight of the suspension on the axle, because that can throw off the height for our end links. So just getting that out of the way. From there, we're going to start by taking off the nuts that are holding on our U-bolts, and then we're going to be slapping on the axle plate. Now with this specific kit, the axle plate needs to run with the pointed portion of it facing inward and towards the front of the motorhome. So when this goes on, it'll slide up just like this. And that's going to be right under the little tie plate here. So it'll be between the tie plate and the nuts. With how old our motorhome is, this was kind of a nightmare to take off. I spent the last 5 hours on this side just taking these nuts off with a torque multiplier. As you can see, it's pretty gross over here from all the rust. I've been spraying a ton of penetrating oil just trying to kind of break these free and then rubbing, or trying to clean out each of the threads with a wire brush. So if you're planning on doing this, definitely get down here maybe a week in advance. Start spraying it out. Try and clean out the threads as best you can. We want this to look nice and clean here. That way if you do have to struggle, hopefully it's only the portion where the nut still is, and then the rest of this you can just be clean, break right out of there. So like I said, a lot of prep work depending on the age of your motorhome. So I'm gonna get started taking this side out, and then we'll get that plate installed. So this last bolt, I got 90% of the way there, and then now it's sticking and the impact is not getting it off. So I've got a 4x4 piece of wood. I'm just setting that up against my other studs for my, or the other sides of the U-bolts here. And then I'm using my torque multiplier to take this off. This is incredibly slow, but it is the only way that's gonna be strong enough to actually break these free. Since I've had so much free time to sit here and crank this, I've actually counted. So for one full rotation of our socket, it is 100 cranks with our torque multiplier. So this is a case where you probably want to use our dealer locator and look up a shop near you by entering in your zip code, and then you can have them professionally install it with some air tools and make your life a whole lot easier so that you don't have to do this yourself. Put our lower tie plate back on. Then we are going to grab the axle plate. And like I said before, we want to make sure that we have that point facing towards the front of the vehicle and towards the center. That lined up. Next, we'll take one of our flat washers and our nuts and thread that on a bit to help hold this up. I'm just going to get to a point where I probably won't be able to do it by hand here just because of how old and rusty this is. There we go. Have that help hold it. And start threading on the other ones. I've also sprayed these out a few times with some more penetrating oil, and I brushed them a bunch, hopefully to clean out anything that could be in the threads, but still, these are a bit of a fight. So this does need to sit at a little bit of an angle. On the passenger side, we did have a few issues. I was a little bit worried about this rubbing against our caliper. We've got about 1/8 of an inch between the bracket and the caliper. Now we talked to Roadmaster and they said that, you know, you can grind it down a little bit, but there really isn't much you can shave off of here because we have a slotted hole here. So I'm gonna leave it alone. Our caliper shouldn't move, but originally when I was holding this up and trying to get everything kind of back together, it was rubbing against the caliper bolt, which we can't have happen. So as it stands right now, it's angled back to how it should be because this is technically at an angle just with how the suspension's sitting. We've got it perpendicular now, it's straight up and down, even though you see it at an angle. Same one over here on the driver's side, and now we're matching up. Because the big thing here is that these holes are gonna hold our D-shaped brackets, and that's gonna hold up the actual bar itself. And then we're gonna have to have our end links come out, and we're gonna be drilling holes in the frame rail for the brackets for that to sit. So with this sitting even across, the next part's gonna be torquing each one of these nuts back down and then getting our brackets ready to go and our sway bar up in place. When you're doing this, this is a torque wrench that most people probably won't have. So this is another reason why you might need to reach out to a dealer, make sure that they have the proper tools to retorque the U-bolts here and make sure everything is nice and safe, ready to go for you. But we're gonna be torquing this up pretty high, but kind of crisscross it. That way you're evenly kind of just distributing that weight between them, so that way it's not trying to pull the U-bolt more to one side than the other. And really the best way to get that is to do that from the start. So when you are tightening these up and just snugging them to begin with your impact or your wrench or whatever you're using, Just crisscross, make sure each one kind of has the same amount of threads. Obviously ours is slightly different here. We have a little bit more in the back than we do on the front, but I think that's really just with how the U-bolt had to sit on here. So with all that said, I'm gonna keep working away here. All right, so for our D-shaped brackets, we're gonna have a few different slots to go through here. So if you go with the front ones, the ones facing more towards the front of the motorhome, that's gonna be if you're over 18,000 pounds in GVWR, or if your front sway bar, or sorry, not front, your rear sway bar is lower. So in our case, ours is above the axle. Roadmaster's seen in some cases where they mount it below it, and then that obviously would be in your way. So with ours, we're going to be going with the rear ones just because we're under 18,000 GVWR and our sway bar is not in the way. So I'm going to hit these two holes, but before we do so, we need to lube up our bushings. So that's these guys right here. They're going to have a little slot in them so that you can get them onto the sway bar. And in your kit, you're going to see this green lube right here. We're going to take about half of that out. And I highly recommend wearing some gloves because this stuff kind of gets everywhere. And we're just going to lube that all up. Now this lube should last a pretty good time. It's not like something you'd have to routinely replace, but it is a good idea to routinely check the torque of your bolts and maybe get down and just look at these bushings anyway. Like I said, they should last probably the lifetime of the motorhome, but you can see with the factory one, the bushings have completely been eaten out of the brackets that actually hold the bar. So right now the bar is just being held up by the end links. So they're really not doing the best job that they could, because now it's forcing all that tension on the end links instead of forcing it against the axle, because it's not pressing against that bracket at all. I don't even know if when it's starting to sway and lean back and forth that it would even touch the bracket just with how much space is in there. So it's really important that you do routinely go around and just kind of check. Make sure that all your components are up to snuff, so that way when you're out on your trip, you're not finding out last minute or on the side of the road that you have to do a whole bunch of maintenance. One thing I like to do, just because I don't want to smear this all over the place and then get it all over myself, is just kind of measure the spacing. So from center to center of our holes, it's right around 33.5. So when I come over here, I'll put it at that 33.5, kind of see where we land. So I should be about right there and there. So that way it makes it a little bit easier so you're not making such a mess. So we'll split these open once I find the slit. There it is. This is what I was saying with the gloves. Of course it's not going to separate for me now, so I'm going to get this all over myself again. Go. Now, as far as our hardware goes for the shackle brackets, it's going to be one of the 2-inch bolts, the 1/2 inch by 2, and then we're going to have a flat washer that's going to slip through our bracket. And remember which holes you need to use depending on your GVWR. So I'm going to get these two in because I'm using the rear ones. And then once we get our bracket up here, I'm going to have another flat washer that's going to go against it, and then a lock nut. This might be a part where you want to ask somebody else to come help you, because you're going to have to hold the bar, hold the bracket, and then also get your hardware on. Let's see if this will stick for long enough for me to grab it all. Get this back one started. Once you get a couple threads, that should hold it up, give you a little bit more wiggle room to get the rest going. Now that we have these on here, I'm going to center this a little bit more. It kind of slid around during our bolt up session here. Another thing you can do is I'll stick your tape measure. Just measure from the edge of the bushing out to the end of your sway bar to see if you've got an even amount on both sides. Looks like I'm right at 4 inches here and 4 inches there. So I'm right where I should be. So now that we know this is centered, I'm going to take my 19mm socket and wrench. I'm going to tighten down each of these bolts. We're just going to snug them, and then we can come back with our torque wrench and fully tighten it down. Should have said this before, but just make sure that you're installing the baller correctly. So you can see we have our Roadmaster sticker on here. It should be facing out and you should be able to read it. If it's upside down, then you also have your bar upside down. So be careful, make sure you're installing it correctly. You don't want to do it twice. So the next part is going to be hooking up your end links. That's these guys right here to the frame brackets, and then we kind of figure out where in the frame where we're going to be drilling. I wanted to take out a little bit of the guessing on this just because there's different slots you can use. So my idea is that we will hold this pretty much level because I want that level, and that's getting me right around 12.5, 13 inches there up to the frame rail. So the frame bracket, if you go off the first hole, is 2 inches up to the bottom of the frame, 4 inches if you go to the bottom hole. On this end link, we're looking at right at 8 at the top hole, 9.5 at the second, and then 10 3/4 at the bottom here. So if I go with the middle one, that's probably going to be too much. So I'm going to probably do the first hole on my end link, so that uppermost one, closest to the eyelet, and then that's 8 inches. Plus the 4 I put on here with the frame bracket. That'll give me 12 inches. And then from there, if I need to, I can also go down a hole and get a little bit more length out of it. But I think that's where I'm going to start with, just to start figuring this out and mark our holes in the frame. So for this, we're going to be taking the 5/8 hardware. I'll run that through. So just like so, when this comes up, it'll sit more like this. And then you'll have your frame bracket on there as well. And with our end link, we want that also going straight up. So I think we're good with that setup. I'm gonna get some more hardware, so the other 5/8 bolt, I'm gonna stick it through there, and then we'll get this kind of clamped up in there. I'm gonna use a, actually got a clamp laying right on the floor over there. I'm gonna grab that, and I'm gonna clamp this to the frame rail, and then we can mark it with a paint marker on the outside, and then we'll have to drill. So I played around with it a little bit. I think I like this angle. It's pretty parallel with our tie plate for the axle here. So I think we're good with that. And I've clamped the frame bracket up to the frame rail so that way we can mark it. Try and get your clamp as close to the center as possible. With all of this hardware still being loose, it kind of wants to wobble back and forth, so you're not really having it pressed fully up against the frame unless you really force it to. But once you do have it straight up, it's forced against the frame, we're going to come back with that paint marker, and on the outside of the frame rail we're going to have a L bracket that kind of comes up, and that's going to have 2 holes in it, and we're going to be drilling out 1/2-inch holes in the frame rail here. So I'm going to come over on this side and mark those holes with my paint marker. Now that I have that marked, I'm going to lower the bracket out of the way so that way it's not getting scratched up when we're drilling through here. I would start out, I'm going to hit it with a hole punch right in the center of my marking, and then I'm going to work my way up from a 1/8-inch bit all the way up to 1/2 inch. And then I typically like to kind of just skip between every other size. And as you go through, it's going to be a whole lot easier than sitting there forever with that 1/2-inch bit. So knock a little bit out and then just keep making that hole wider and wider as you go, and it shouldn't take you too long. Now that I have my holes drilled out, I'm going to come back with my file and just scrape off any burrs that we might have that could prevent our bracket from fully sinking up here. Really isn't too bad, at least on the outside here. Let's see on the inside. Yeah, on the inside you can see there's a bunch of burrs all over it. So we'll want to cut those out real quick with the file. So our hardware, a little bit of a discrepancy between what I'm seeing on the instructions and what we actually have here. This is a 1 3/4 inch bolt, but this one has a shoulder on it. The other ones I'm seeing, at least even in our pictures that we have for it on our website, aren't showing this style bolt. But this is what I am somewhat reading. I mean, it's 1/2 inch hardware, and it's the correct grade. It's grade 8 there, so it's not like this is the wrong bolt, but you might find that it doesn't look exactly like it does in the pictures. But a lot of things have also changed since then too, because back then there was also yellow bushings and here we have blue ones. So I'm going to assume it's just a update that hasn't really taken effect picture-wise yet or in the instructions. But long story short, we're going to be using this bolt. We're going to have a flat washer on the bolt head. That's going to slot through our bracket here and our frame rail, and then on the inside of our frame rail we're going to have another flat washer and a lock nut. That's these two right here. So I'm going to get these lined up. Get my flat washer on, lock nut, and same thing on the other side. And I'm doing bolt head on the outside of the frame coming in, that way it's not going to interfere with our leaf spring pack. When I tighten this up, you can see I've got a little bit of a gap here. I'm going to make sure that as I'm tightening it, I'm also holding it up. And I might even just put my clamp on there as I tighten down these two bolts, make sure that this fully stays up against our frame rail. So didn't really have much room, especially with this other plate being in the way, so I'm going to have to get creative with that guy or try to take him out. Looks like he's got 3 screws holding them in. But like I said, I just used a clamp and I got it on here. Big thing here is to make sure that it's flush against the frame. So I clamped it in the center and I got this left side done, or at least just snugged down. And I've got all the way up against the frame here and on the bottom as well. So we know we're good on that. So I'm not going to need the clamp again on this side, which it's honestly going to be in the way. So let's get this one snugged down as well. And to do so, we're going to need a 19mm socket and wrench. I need to probably switch to a short well on this side though, just and stay within the frame so I can get behind that without having to take it out. All right, I'm probably going to start cranking on the head of the bolt just because I don't really have much room here. It's pretty loose. Now we're making some headway here. So now we're going to repeat the same process over on the other side where we drill our holes, get our shackles all set up and our end links here. Once you have all that ready to go, then you can torque it down. So I'm snug on this side. I still have to snug down that other side, but I'm all ready to go with my torque wrench. Same thing, 19mm. And let's get these tightened down. So on the bushing side here, this is going to be a much lower torque setting. Make sure that you're not overdoing it because we want this to still be able to move. Because as your suspension compresses and rebounds back, this is going to be basically the way that it's going to adjust for that travel by this just kind of moving back and forth. So that way our anti-sway bar can move up and down with it. Otherwise, it's just going to sit there and bind. All right, now that we have all of our bolts torqued down to the correct tightness, that'll do it for the install portion. What's important next is that we go out, we test drive our vehicle, get some miles in on it, come back, double check your torque settings, make sure everything is still nice and snug, and if it's not, re-torque it back. And then your routine maintenance from now on is that you would check this typically before every trip. Most people probably aren't, so I would at least do it maybe once a season, just to give yourself a good once-over and make sure that you don't have a situation like we have already with the factory sway bar where the bushings are gone and owner doesn't know about it. Well, that'll do it for our look at and installation of the Roadmaster rear anti-sway bar here in our 2005 Coachmen Mirada Class A motorhome. My name's Kevin, and if you still have some questions about what's going to be the right rear anti-sway bar for your motorhome, please feel free to reach out to us via our Ask the Experts link, a comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department, and we'd be happy to help you out on your journey.